They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but Serena didn't want revenge. She wanted to own the restaurant. Picture this. A woman stands in the pouring rain on a dark Palo Alto street, clutching a trash bag filled with her clothes. Her husband, the tech genius of the year, just laughed in her face and slammed the door, telling her she was bad for the brand. He thought he broke her. He thought she was nothing without him, but he forgot one tiny detail. She wrote the code that made him rich. And when she comes back, it won't be as his wife. It will be as the CEO of the one company he fears most. You are not going to believe how this ends. The silence inside the sprawling glass mansion at 1400 Sand Hill Road was louder than the storm raging outside. It was a cold, sterile silence, the kind that money buys to keep the messiness of the real world at bay. Serena Sterling stood in the center of the living room, her hands trembling. She wasn't trembling from the air conditioning, which was set to a brisk 68 degrees, just the way Richard liked it. She was trembling because the man she had spent the last 7 years building a life with was currently pouring himself a glass of Macallan 25 and refusing to look her in the eye. "It's not a negotiation, Serena," Richard said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He swirled the amber liquid, staring out at the rain-lashed infinity pool. "The IPO is in 3 months. The board, I, need a certain image. We're scaling to a $10 billion valuation. Sterling Systems is about the future. And you?" He finally turned. His face was handsome, chiseled, the face that graced the cover of Forbes last month under the headline, "The Architect of Tomorrow." But his eyes were dead. "You're stuck in the past," he finished. "You're comfortable. You wear oversized sweaters. You talk about ethics and AI. You're quaint. And quite frankly, you're depressing the stock price before we've even rung the bell." Serena felt the air leave her lungs. "I built the core architecture, Richard. The predictive neural net. That was my thesis. You couldn't get it to compile for 6 months until I fixed the latency issue in the kernel." Richard laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. "You wrote some code, Serena. Years ago, I built the empire. I secured the funding from Sequoia. I charmed the regulators in D.C. You? You're just the wife who hangs around the office making the interns nervous." He walked over to the marble kitchen island and slid a thick manila envelope across the surface. "Sign it." "What is it?" Serena whispered. "Post-nuptial dissolution. You get the condo in San Jose, the 2021 Audi, and a monthly stipend of $5,000 for 3 years. In exchange, you waive all equity rights to Sterling Systems, you vacate this property tonight, and you adhere to a strict NDA. You don't talk to the press, you don't talk to competitors, and you certainly don't claim you had anything to do with the source code." Serena stared at him. "And if I don't sign?" Richard took a sip of his scotch. "Then I release the medical records from your episode 3 years ago. The anxiety attacks? The therapy sessions? I'll paint you as unstable, Serena. I'll make sure every judge in California sees you as a liability. You'll get nothing. No condo, no stipend. Just legal fees that will bury you." The cruelty was so precise, so calculated, it took her breath away. He had saved those records. He had kept them as ammunition. Serena looked around the house. The minimalist art, the polished concrete floors. It felt like a museum, not a home. She realized then that she had never really lived here. She was just another asset. And now, she was a depreciating one. She didn't cry. That was the surprising part. A cold numbness washed over her. She walked to the counter, picked up the Mont Blanc pen lying there, and signed the papers without reading the fine print. Richard looked surprised, perhaps even a little disappointed he didn't get a fight. Smart girl. "I'm taking my personal things," Serena said, her voice hollow. "You have 20 minutes. Security will escort you out." 20 minutes later, Serena stood on the curb. The heavy oak door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. She had one suitcase and a trash bag filled with clothes. The rain soaked through her hoodie instantly. She watched as the lights in the living room dimmed. Richard was probably already on a call with his PR team, drafting the statement about their amicable separation due to growing apart. She walked to the Audi parked in the driveway, the only thing he let her keep because it was 3 years old and off-brand for him now. She threw her bags in the back, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. She didn't start the car immediately. She just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She looked at the rearview mirror. Her hair was matted with rain, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked like a wreck. "Okay," she whispered to the empty car. "Okay." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, battered USB drive. Richard had been so focused on the equity and the house, so obsessed with stripping her name off the legal documents, that he had forgotten about the backup server logs she kept for debugging. He thought he was the architect. But Serena knew the truth. Sterling Systems was built on a foundation of sand, and she was the only one who knew where the cracks were. She started the engine. She wasn't going to the condo in San Jose. That was where he wanted her to go to fade away into suburbia. She put the car in gear and turned onto the highway, heading north toward the city, towards the only place that hated Richard Sterling as much as she did. For the first 2 weeks, Serena lived out of a Motel 6 near the airport in South San Francisco. It was a far cry from the mansion in Palo Alto. The walls were thin, smelling of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. The constant roar of planes taking off overhead made sleep impossible, which was fine because Serena wasn't sleeping anyway. She had $300 in her checking account. Richard had frozen their joint assets, pending the processing of the settlement, a petty move designed to starve her out. She spent her days in the back corner of a 2-4-hour diner called Penny's, nursing endless cups of black coffee and typing furiously on her 5-year-old laptop. She wasn't coding, she was analyzing. She was dissecting Sterling Systems' upcoming product launch, the Ether project. It was an AI-driven logistics platform intended to replace human dispatchers entirely. Richard was selling it to the Department of Defense and Amazon. It was the deal that would make him a billionaire. But Serena knew the code. She remembered a specific subroutine in the decision-making tree, subroutine 44B. It had a tendency to hallucinate data when the server load exceeded 95%. Richard had forced the engineering team to bypass the safety checks to speed up the demo. "He's going to launch it live," Serena muttered to herself, staring at the screen. "He's arrogant enough to do it." "More coffee, hon?" Serena looked up. The waitress, a woman named Brenda, with kind eyes and tired feet, was hovering with a pot. "Please," Serena said. "And, do you have today's Financial Times? The one someone left in the booth over there?" Brenda grabbed the paper and slid it onto the table. "Here you go. You looking for a job?" "Something like that," Serena said. She opened the paper. Page 3. There was a photo of a man getting into a limousine. He looked like he had been in a street fight and won, but at a cost. He had messy salt and pepper hair, a sharp jawline, and a suit that cost more than the motel she was staying in. Yet he wore it carelessly, like he didn't give a damn. James Cavendish, The Lion in Winter. The article detailed how Cavendish's company, Apex Dynamics, was losing market share to Sterling Systems. Cavendish was described as brilliant but volatile, an old-school engineer who refused to play the hype game that Richard Sterling excelled at. Wall Street was calling for Cavendish to step down. They said he was obsolete. Serena stared at the photo. James Cavendish was Richard's sworn enemy. 10 years ago, they had been partners, until Richard stole a patent and pushed James out. It was the origin story of Silicon Valley's bitterest feud. If there was one person on Earth who wanted to see Richard Sterling burn, it was James Cavendish. But you didn't just walk up to James Cavendish. He was notoriously reclusive. He worked out of a fortress-like office in the Presidio, guarded by NDAs and ex-military security. Serena looked at her laptop, then at the newspaper, then at her reflection in the dark window of the diner. She opened her email client. She didn't have his email address, but she knew how tech CEOs structured their handles. She tried jim@apex.com, bounce back. She tried jcavendish@apex.com, bounce back. She paused, thinking like an engineer. James was paranoid. He wouldn't use a standard corporate email. She remembered an obscure interview he gave to Wired 5 years ago, where he mentioned his obsession with the Battle of Thermopylae. She typed, Leonidas arroba apex ponticom. Subject, the flaw in Sterling's ether. I have the logs. She attached a single file, a snippet of code showing the hallucination error in subroutine 44B. No text in the body, just the code. She hit send. She waited. 1 hour passed. Then 2. The diner emptied out. At 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. Hello? Serena answered, her voice raspy. You have 30 seconds. A deep, gravelly voice said. No introduction. Tell me something I don't know, or I block this number and trace you for corporate espionage. Subroutine 44B, Serena said, her heart hammering against her ribs. When the query load hits 95%, the node doesn't throttle. It invents data to fill the gap. Richard bypassed the safety protocol on October 14th. I have the commit log. Silence on the other end. Heavy, breathing silence. Who is this? The voice asked. The person who wrote the original safety protocol, Serena said. My name is Serena Sterling, and I want a job. Sterling? The voice dripped with sudden venom. You're his wife. Ex-wife. As of 2 weeks ago, why should I trust you? This could be a Trojan horse. Because he kicked me out with nothing but a trash bag of clothes and an NDA he thinks is ironclad, Serena said, her voice hardening. He took my life, Mr. Cavendish. I don't want his money. I want his head on a platter, and you're the only one with a knife big enough to cut it off. There was a long pause. Be at the Presidio Gate, Lombard Street entrance. 6 a.m. Come alone. If you're wearing a wire, my security will find it. The line went dead. The fog was thick at the Presidio, rolling in off the Golden Gate Bridge like a cold blanket. Serena parked her beat-up Audi next to a line of pristine black SUVs. She stepped out, smoothing down her blazer. She had bought it at a thrift store the day before for $12. It was slightly too big in the shoulders, but it was clean. She pulled her hair back into a severe bun. She needed to look like a weapon, not a victim. A massive man in a gray suit approached her. He patted her down without a word, scanned her with a wand, and took her phone. Follow me. He led her into a nondescript brick building that looked like an old military barracks from the outside. Inside, it was a spaceship, walls of glass, humming server racks, and a holographic display table in the center of the room. Standing by the window, looking out at the fog, was James Cavendish. He turned. In person, he was even more imposing than in the photos. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that looked like they could dismantle an engine block. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore a black turtleneck and jeans, like a tech Steve McQueen. Serena Sterling, he said, testing the name like it was a bad taste in his mouth. You look tired. I've been living in a Motel 6, she said flatly. It builds character. James smirked. Just a little. He gestured to the holographic table. I ran the code snippet you sent. It's authentic. If Richard launches Aether with that bug, any logistics chain using it will collapse within 48 hours. Trucks will be sent to the wrong cities. Inventory will vanish. He knows about the bug, Serena said, stepping forward. He just thinks it's rare enough that he can patch it post-launch. He's gambling on a 1% failure rate. But you know how to trigger it, James said. It wasn't a question. I know the specific data sequence that overloads the node. I can write a script that simulates a traffic spike. If you run that script during his live demo next month, the system crashes, James finished. Publicly, humiliatingly, and the stock tanks, Serena added. James looked at her for a long moment. Why come to me? You could have gone to the press. The press would just call it a glitch. They'd forgive him in a news cycle. Richard is charming. He spins things. I need someone who can capitalize on the failure. Someone who has a better product ready to step in the moment he fails. James walked over to her, stopping just a few feet away. I have a product. Project Onyx. It's better than Ether. Faster. More stable. But I don't have the interface. My engineers are brilliant at back-end, but the UX is garbage. We can't sell it. Serena's eyes lit up. I can fix the UX. I designed the interface for Sterling's first 3 platforms. I know how to make complex data look simple for the board members. James crossed his arms. You're asking me to hire the ex-wife of my biggest rival. If this gets out, it looks like desperation or collusion. Then don't hire me as Serena Sterling, she said. She reached into her bag and pulled out her passport. My maiden name is Jenkins, but I don't want to use that either. I want to be a ghost. A ghost, James mused. Hire me as a consultant under a shell company. Put me in the basement. Give me a team of your hungriest, most undervalued engineers. I'll fix Project Onyx in 6 weeks. When Richard's demo fails, your product will be ready to launch the next morning. And what's your price? James asked. Serena looked him dead in the eye. I don't want a salary. I want equity. 5% of Apex Dynamics if we succeed. And one more thing, which is when we win. When we finally crush him. I want to be the one who walks into his office and buys him out. James studied her face. He saw the anger, yes. But beneath the anger, he saw the intellect. He saw the woman who had been the secret engine of Sterling Systems for years, hidden in the shadow of a narcissist. He extended a hand. His grip was rough, calloused. Welcome to the war, Serena, James said. You can start in the basement, but get comfortable. You won't be staying there long. The basement of Apex Dynamics was not a place for the faint of heart. It was affectionately known as the bunker. There were no windows. The air smelled of ozone and energy drinks, and the only light came from the glow of 64 curved monitors arranged in a semicircle. This was where Serena Jenkins, as she was now known on the payroll, spent 20 hours a day. When James Cavendish first introduced her to the back-end team, the reception was frostier than the server room. The lead engineer, a brilliant but socially abrasive man named Miller, had looked at her thrift store blazer and sneered. We don't need a babysitter for the UI, Miller had said, not bothering to stand up. The code works. If the users are too stupid to understand command lines, that's a user error, not a system error. The users are the Pentagon and Amazon Logistics, Serena had replied, her voice steady. They don't want command lines, Miller. They want a dashboard that tells them where their $1 billion of cargo is in under 3 seconds. Right now, your interface looks like a DOS prompt from 1995. Miller had laughed. And you're going to fix it? The ex-wife? I heard you were just the diversity hire at Sterling. The room had gone silent. It was a low blow, one that Richard had planted in the rumor mill years ago. Serena didn't flinch. She walked over to Miller's terminal. Move. Excuse me? I said move. She didn't wait. She grabbed his chair and spun it away, sitting down at his keyboard. Her fingers flew across the mechanical keys. The sound was like a machine gun. You're using a redundant SQL query for the geospatial rendering, she said as she typed, not looking at him. It's causing a 400 millisecond lag every time the map refreshes, and your API calls aren't batched. Watch. She hit enter. On the main screen, the jagged, ugly map of the San Francisco supply chain suddenly smoothed out. The dots representing trucks stopped jumping and started gliding in real time. The frame rate tripled. She stood up and spun the chair back to Miller, who was staring at the screen with his mouth slightly open. I'm not a diversity hire, Serena said, her voice echoing in the silent room. I'm the person who's going to make sure your brilliant backend doesn't get thrown in the trash because nobody knows how to drive it. Now, does anyone else have a problem with me? Silence. Then, Miller quietly pulled his chair back in. The color scheme. It needs to be darker. For high-contrast environments. Agreed, Serena said. Let's get to work. For the next 3 weeks, Serena became a ghost. She slept on a cot in the break room. She ate whatever Brenda, the waitress from the diner, who Serena now paid to deliver food, brought her. She wasn't just working. She was exorcising Richard from her system. Every line of code she wrote for Project Onyx was a strike against him. Richard liked things flashy, superficial, and overpromised. Serena built Onyx to be lethal, efficient, and unbreakable. James Cavendish watched her from the glass walkway above. He saw the way the team, initially hostile, began to orbit around her. She wasn't leading by shouting. She was leading by competence. She was the first one in and the last one out. One night, around 2 a.m., James came down to the bunker. The engineers had gone home. Only Serena was left, the blue light of the screens illuminating her face. She looked exhausted, her cheekbones sharper than when she arrived, her eyes shadowed. He placed a cup of tea on the desk. "You're going to burn out before the launch." Serena didn't look away from the code. "I'll sleep when Richard is bankrupt." James pulled up a chair. "You know, when Richard and I started, he wasn't always like that. He was hungry. Like you." "He was never like me," Serena said, finally stopping. She took a sip of the tea. It was Earl Grey, hot and strong. "Richard was hungry for the spotlight. I was hungry for the solution. There's a difference." "He stole my patent," James said quietly. "The original compression algorithm that launched Sterling Systems. We wrote it together in a garage in Palo Alto. He took the hard drives while I was at my mother's funeral. By the time I got back, he had filed the paperwork in his name only." Serena looked at him. She saw the pain behind the stoic facade. It wasn't just business for James either. "He told me I was bad for the brand," Serena whispered. "That's what he said when he kicked me out. That I was too old, too anxious, too real." James looked at the screen, at the elegant, intuitive interface she had built. It was a masterpiece of design, complex data, rendered into simple, actionable beauty. "He's a fool," James said. The sincerity in his voice made Serena pause. "He threw away the engine of his Ferrari because he didn't like the paint job." James stood up. "Get some sleep, Serena. Tomorrow, we start the stress tests. If Onyx holds, we're ready." "It will hold," Serena said. "I built it to carry the weight of the world." 2 days before the Sterling Systems IPO and product launch, the tech world descended on San Francisco for the Innovators Gala. It was the event of the season, a black tie affair where billions of dollars in deals were whispered over champagne. Richard Sterling was the guest of honor. Serena stood in front of the full-length mirror in James's guest suite at the Presidio. She didn't recognize herself. The woman in the mirror wasn't the frantic wife in the rain-soaked hoodie. She wore a backless dress of midnight blue silk that hugged her frame like liquid armor. Her hair, usually messy, was styled in sleek Hollywood waves. She wore stiletto heels that made her 3 inches taller. Her makeup was sharp, accentuating her eyes. "You look dangerous," James said from the doorway. He was wearing a tuxedo, looking every bit the brooding billionaire. "That's the point," Serena said, applying a coat of dark red lipstick. "Tonight isn't about hiding. It's about reconnaissance." "Are you sure you can handle seeing him?" James asked. "He'll be there with his entourage, and probably someone new." "I'm counting on it," Serena said. "I need to see his face when he thinks he's won. It makes what comes next sweeter." They arrived at the gala in James's matte black Aston Martin. The cameras flashed as they stepped onto the red carpet. The press went wild. James Cavendish, the recluse, was out in public, and who was the mystery woman on his arm? Inside, the ballroom was a sea of egos. Serena kept her head high, her hand lightly resting on James's arm. She felt the eyes on her. They were whispering, "Is that Serena Sterling? No, it can't be. She looks incredible." And then she saw him. Richard was holding court near the bar. He looked impeccable in a white tuxedo jacket, laughing loudly at something a senator was saying. Hanging on his arm was a girl who couldn't have been older than 22. She was stunning, blonde, and looked completely bored. Serena felt a spike of adrenaline, but surprisingly, no pain, just cold clarity. "Ready?" James murmured. "Always," she replied. They walked straight toward him. The crowd parted. Richard turned, his smile freezing in place when he saw James. And then his eyes slid to Serena. For a second, he didn't recognize her. He looked at her with the predatory appreciation he gave any beautiful woman. Then, recognition dawned. His eyes widened, his jaw tightened. "James," Richard said, his voice tight. And, Serena, my God, you look expensive? Serena finished for him, her voice smooth as glass. It's amazing what happens when you drop 180 pounds of dead weight, Richard. The young blonde looked between them, confused. Richie, who is this? Richie? James suppressed a smirk. This is my ex-wife, Richard snapped, losing his cool for a fraction of a second. He turned back to Serena, stepping closer, lowering his voice so the senator wouldn't hear. What are you doing here, Serena? You're violating the NDA. If you say one word about the company, I'm not here to talk about your company, Richard, Serena said, leaning in. She smelled of jasmine and cold rain. I'm here to celebrate. Celebrate what? Your big day, she said. The ether launch. I truly hope it goes exactly as you deserve. Richard narrowed his eyes. He was trying to find the fear he was used to seeing in her. He couldn't find it. Don't play games with me, Richard hissed. I heard you're sleeping on a cot in Cavendish's basement. You're pathetic. You think dressing up in a rented gown changes anything? You're still the unstable mess I threw out. Serena smiled. It was a terrifying smile. I didn't rent the gown, Richard. I bought it. With the signing bonus James gave me. She turned to the blonde girl. Run, honey. While you still have your own personality, he feeds on them. Serena turned on her heel and walked away, James at her side. As they moved through the crowd, Serena's hand was trembling slightly. James covered it with his own. You did good, he said. I got what I needed, Serena whispered. What? I saw his phone. He had the live server dashboard open on his screen. The load capacity was at 88%, just from the pre-launch demos. James stopped. 88%? But the system isn't even live yet. Exactly, Serena said, her eyes gleaming. He's running the demo on a localized server to reduce latency, but he's piping in fake user data to impress the investors. He's artificially inflating the load to show demand, which means, James realized, he's already pushing the node near the breaking point. He's doing the work for us, Serena said. We don't need a massive botnet attack to trigger the bug. We just need a nudge. A single, targeted query during the live presentation will tip it over the 95% threshold. And then subroutine 44B kicks in, Serena said, and the hallucination begins. The day of the launch, the world was watching. The event was being live-streamed to millions. The stage was set at the Moscone Center. Giant screens displayed the Sterling Systems logo. The atmosphere was electric. Richard Sterling walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He wore a black t-shirt and jeans, the uniform of the visionary. Today, Richard boomed, we don't just change logistics. We change the definition of movement. In the war room at Apex Dynamics, the mood was very different. The lights were off. The 64 screens were glowing red and blue. Serena sat in the center chair, wearing her headset. James stood behind her, arms crossed. Target locked, Miller said, from the station to her left. We have a backdoor connection through the public API. He left the port open. He's arrogant, Serena muttered. He thinks no one would dare touch him. On the main screen, the live feed showed Richard gesturing to a massive holographic map of the world behind him. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Aether, Richard said. A fully autonomous, AI-driven global dispatch system. Zero human error, zero latency, total perfection. The map lit up. Thousands of little drone icons appeared, moving across continents. Let's see it in action, Richard said. I am going to simulate a medical emergency supply drop to a remote village in the Andes. Watch how Aether calculates the route in real time, adjusting for weather and fuel. Zero, Serena said. Miller hit the key. It wasn't a hack. It was a simple query. A request for information sent to the system, but formatted in a specific, recursive way that Serena knew caused a memory leak in the decision tree. On the stage, the holographic map flickered. Richard didn't notice at first. As you can see, the drone is selecting the optimal path. The drone icon on the screen suddenly took a sharp left turn. Instead of heading toward the Andes, it shot across the Pacific Ocean. The audience murmured. Richard glanced back. He chuckled nervously. Ah, looks like it's taking the scenic route to avoid a storm system. Smart AI. Push it, Serena commanded. Execute the load script. Levels 2 through 5. Miller typed furiously. Injecting traffic now. On the giant screen behind Richard, the map began to bleed. It wasn't just one drone. Suddenly, every ship in the Atlantic Ocean turned 90 degrees and began driving onto land. Trucks in Europe were routed into the Mediterranean Sea. The medical supply drop in the Andes suddenly multiplied. Instead of one drone, 5,000 drones appeared on the screen, swarming the village like locusts. The audience gasped. Richard turned around, his face draining of color. Technical. We have a small glitch in the visualization. The data is correct. It's just the display. He's lying, James said, watching the feed. Look at his hands. He's shaking. Finish him, Serena whispered. She reached forward to her own keyboard. She didn't need Miller for this part. She accessed the admin log, the one Richard hadn't changed the default password for, because he couldn't be bothered to remember a new one. She entered a command that forced the system to display its internal logic process on the main screen. Suddenly, over the chaotic map, giant lines of text appeared for the whole world to see. Error. Subroutine 44B, failure. Data not found. Generating fictional coordinates to sustain uptime. Warning. System hallucination active. The crowd went silent. Generating fictional coordinates. Richard Sterling stood on stage, dwarfed by the undeniable proof of his fraud. The text was 40 feet high. It's a hack, Richard screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking. We are being attacked. Cut the feed. Cut the damn feed. The screen went black, but it was too late. In the Apex war room, the silence was heavy. Then, slowly, the engineers started to clap. It wasn't a cheer. It was the slow, rhythmic applause of respect. Serena took off her headset. She felt lightheaded. Look at the ticker, James said, pointing to a side monitor. Sterling Systems, STER, was in freefall. The stock had dropped 40% in 2 minutes. Trading was halted. The SEC would be knocking on Richard's door within the hour. James turned to Serena. He's dead in the water. The board will fire him before the sun sets. Not yet, Serena said. She stood up. Now we launch. James nodded. He picked up his phone. Released the press statement. 5 minutes later, every phone in the auditorium, where Richard was currently hyperventilating, received a notification. Apex Dynamics announces Onyx, the system that doesn't guess. Live demo available now. You ready? James asked Serena. For what? To go buy a company. The panic inside the headquarters of Sterling Systems was palpable. It wasn't just noise. It was a physical weight in the air. Phones were ringing in a cacophonous, unending drone. Junior analysts were crying in the break rooms. Security guards were shredding documents they hadn't even read. In the executive suite, on the top floor, the silence was even worse. Richard Sterling sat at the head of the mahogany conference table, his tie loosened, his hair a mess. He stared at the Bloomberg terminal on the wall. The stock ticker for STER was a solid red line pointing straight down. Current price, $4.12. Open price, $148. Ling Ling. He had lost $3 billion of market capitalization in 45 minutes. It's a glitch, Richard whispered, his voice cracking. It's a coordinated attack. We can halt trading. Arthur, call the SEC. Tell them we're victims of cyber terrorism. Arthur Blake, the chairman of the board, slowly closed his laptop. He was a man of 60, with skin like parchment and eyes like a shark. He had backed Richard because Richard was a winner. Now, Richard was radioactive. The SEC isn't going to help you, Richard, Arthur said coldly. The logs were displayed on a 40-foot screen. You admitted to the bypass in the panic. It's on tape. You committed fraud. I was optimizing. Richard slammed his fist on the table. I was fixing a latency issue. The product works. The product hallucinates, Arthur snapped. Amazon just pulled the contract. The DoD is launching an inquiry. We are insolvent, Richard. We are dead. The heavy double doors swung open. Richard looked up, expecting security or the police. Instead, James Cavendish walked in. He looked calm, rested, and utterly in control. He was flanked by three lawyers in sharp suits, and walking beside him, wearing the midnight blue dress that looked like armor, was Serena. Richard stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Get out. You have no right to be here. This is a private board meeting." "Actually," James said, sliding a thick document onto the table toward Arthur Blake, "it's a shareholder meeting now." Arthur picked up the document. He scanned the first page. His eyebrows shot up. "What is this?" Richard demanded. "A tender offer," Serena said. Her voice was steady, cutting through the room like a laser. She didn't look at Richard. She looked at the board. Apex Dynamics is offering to acquire Sterling Systems effectively immediately. We will absorb your debt, cover the legal liabilities for the fraud committed by your CEO, and buy out all outstanding shares at $6. $6? Richard laughed hysterically. The stock was worth $150 this morning. This is robbery. I own 40% of this company. I will never sell. You don't have a choice, Richard, Serena said, finally turning to look at him. Richard froze. There was something in her eyes he had never seen before. It wasn't hate, it was pity. "Why don't I have a choice?" Richard sneered. "Because of the margin call," Serena said softly. The room went dead silent. "You leveraged your 40% stake to buy the mansion, the yacht, and the private island in Fiji," Serena continued, reciting his finances from memory. "You took out personal loans against your stock options. When the stock price hit $50, the bank issued a margin call. You didn't answer. When it hit $20, they auto-liquidated your position." Richard's face went white. He scrambled for his phone, opening his banking app. "You didn't check your email, did you?" Serena asked. "You were too busy on stage." Richard stared at his screen. Account balance: $0. Assets seized. "The bank sold your shares 10 minutes ago," Serena said. "And guess who bought them?" James Cavendish smiled. "We did, through a subsidiary called Nemesis Holdings." Serena placed her hands on the table, leaning in. "We own your shares, Richard. We own the controlling interest. You aren't the CEO anymore. You aren't even an employee. You are trespassing." Richard looked around the room. The board members, Arthur, the investors, the people who had toasted him at galas, were all looking at Serena. They were nodding. They saw the lifeboat. They didn't care about the captain. "Arthur?" Richard pleaded. "You can't let them do this. This is my company. I built this." Arthur Blake didn't even look at him. He looked at Serena, Miss Sterling, or is it Miss Jenkins? "Miss Sterling," Serena said. "I'm keeping the name. It looks better on the letterhead." Arthur nodded. "If we accept the acquisition, what happens to the Ether platform?" "We scrap it," Serena said. "It's flawed code, built on a broken architecture. We replace it with Onyx. My team, the team Richard fired or ignored, will integrate the systems within 30 days. We save the contracts, we save the company. But the brand Sterling Systems dies today. It becomes a division of Apex." "And the leadership?" Arthur asked. James stepped forward. "I will remain CEO of Apex Dynamics, but the new division, the division formerly known as Sterling, needs a president who understands the code better than anyone." James turned to Serena. "I nominate Serena Sterling as the new president of the merged entity," James said. Arthur looked at Richard, shivering in his suit, and then at Serena, standing tall and fierce. "Seconded," Arthur said. Motion passed. Richard slumped into his chair. He looked small. The titan of tech, the architect of tomorrow, was just a man with a bad hangover and no money. "Security," Serena said, her voice cool and professional. "Please escort Mr. Sterling from the building. He needs to clear out his desk. He has 20 minutes. Richard looked up, his eyes wet. 20 minutes? That's exactly what you gave me," Serena said. 2 hours later, the San Francisco sky opened up. It wasn't a drizzle. It was a torrential downpour, the kind that washes the grime off the sidewalks and sends tourists scurrying for cover. Richard Sterling stood on the curb. Outside the glass tower, he had commissioned 3 years ago. The building, the spire, scraped the clouds, a monument to his ego, but he was no longer allowed inside. His security badge had been deactivated while he was still in the elevator. The head of security, a man named Henderson, whom Richard had ignored for 5 years, had escorted him to the door with a grip that was professional but firm. "Please don't return to the premises, Mr. Sterling," Henderson had said, not making eye contact. "If you do, we'll have to call the police for trespassing." Now, Richard stood in the rain. He held a cardboard banker's box. Inside were the meager remains of his empire. A framed photo of himself from the cover of Wired, a stress ball, a stapler, and a bottle of Macallan 25 that was three-quarters empty. He looked at his phone. He had dialed Arthur Blake 4 times, straight to voicemail. He had called his lawyer. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." His legal counsel had dumped him the moment the SEC press release hit the wire. He tried to call the blonde girl from the gala, Jennifer, but his text bubbles were turning green. She had blocked him, or he was radioactive. A splash of cold water hit his legs as a taxi sped by. Richard cursed, shivering in his bespoke suit. The Italian wool was soaked through. He looked down at his shoes, hand-stitched leather, worth $2,000 now ruined by a puddle of oil and rainwater. "This can't be happening," he muttered to the gray sky. "I am Richard Sterling. I am the architect." A sleek, black vehicle turned the corner. It wasn't a taxi. It was a Phantom, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, to be exact. The car glided silently toward him, the water parting around its tires like the Red Sea. It slowed to a stop right in front of him. The back window, tinted so dark it looked like a void, slowly rolled down. Warm, golden light from the interior spilled out onto the wet pavement. Serena sat inside. She was dry. She was warm. She held a crystal tumbler of sparkling water in one hand. James Cavendish sat beside her, looking at a tablet, barely acknowledging Richard's existence. Richard took a step forward, clutching his box. Anger, hot and irrational, flared in his chest. "You!" Richard spat, water dripping from his nose. "You think this is funny? You think you can just steal my life?" Serena didn't shout. She didn't look angry. She looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a bug under a microscope. "I didn't steal anything, Richard," she said, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "I purchased a distressed asset at fair market value. You taught me that term, remember? When you bought out that little robotics startup in Austin and fired all the founders, distressed asset." "I built this!" Richard screamed, gesturing to the tower behind him. "I raised the capital. I charmed the Senate. I did the work." "You did the talking," Serena corrected him gently. "I did the work. The code you built your reputation on? That was my thesis. The patch that saved the Series A funding? That was my weekend. The Ether platform? That was the first thing you tried to build without me. And look what happened. It hallucinated, Richard. Just like you." Richard gripped the window frame, his knuckles white. "I can fix it. I just need time. Serena, listen to me. We were a team once. A power couple. We can be again. Cavendish doesn't know you like I do. He's using you." James finally looked up from his tablet. He didn't speak. He just raised an eyebrow, a look of amusement on his face. Serena let out a short, dry laugh. "He is using me, Richard. He's using me as his CEO, and I'm using him for his capital. It's called a partnership. It's based on respect. You wouldn't understand it, because you only understand leverage." "I have leverage," Richard hissed, desperate now. "The medical records, the anxiety attacks. I still have copies. I'll leak them to TMZ. I'll tell the world the new CEO of Sterling is a mental case." Serena leaned forward. The light caught her eyes. They were steel. "Go ahead," she said. "Leak them." "I already did." Richard froze. "What?" "I gave an exclusive interview to the Wall Street Journal an hour ago," Serena said. "I told them everything. The anxiety, the panic attacks, the pressure of living with a narcissist who gaslit me for 7 years. I controlled the narrative, Richard. The article comes out tomorrow. The headline is Breaking the Silence: How Serena Sterling Survived the Silicon Valley Shark Tank. I'm not a liability anymore. I'm a survivor. People love a survivor. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He had played his ace, and she had already burned the card. He slumped. The fight left him all at once. He looked small, wet, and pathetic. I have nothing, he whispered. They froze my accounts. They took the Audi. I don't even have a ride to the hotel. Which hotel? Serena asked. The Four Seasons, Richard muttered instinctively, before remembering, no, I can't go there. My card will decline. Serena reached into her purse, a simple leather bag, not the flashy designer ones he used to force her to carry. She pulled out a white envelope. She held it out through the window. Richard took it with trembling hands. What is this? A check? A settlement? Open it, she said. He tore the wet paper. Inside was a single ticket, Greyhound bus lines, San Francisco to Sacramento, departure 8 p.m. Behind the ticket was a voucher for a motel, the Starlight Inn, 2 nights paid in full. Richard stared at the ticket. A bus ticket? To Sacramento? You're joking. You have family in Sacramento, don't you? Serena asked. Your cousin? The one you stopped talking to because he was a mechanic and bad for your image? Richard looked up, his eyes rimmed with red. You're sending me away on a bus? After everything? It's a restart, Richard, Serena said, her voice void of malice, but full of finality. When you kicked me out, you gave me 20 minutes and a trash bag. You told me I was nothing. You tried to starve me out. She paused. I'm giving you a chance. Go to Sacramento, call your cousin, get a job with your hands, build something real for the first time in your life. Or don't. Stay here and drown. It's not my problem anymore. Serena, Richard's voice broke. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. Goodbye, Richard. She pressed the button. The dark window rolled up, sealing the warm, golden world away from him. Wait! Serena! Richard banged on the glass with his fist. Don't leave me here. I'm the architect. The Rolls-Royce pulled away smoothly, the tires hissing on the wet asphalt. Richard ran a few steps after it, slipping on the wet pavement, almost dropping his box. He stopped, panting, watching the taillights fade into the mist of the city he used to own. He stood alone in the rain, clutching a Greyhound ticket, realizing for the first time that the nothing he had wished upon her had finally come home to him. Inside the car, the silence was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of a storm finally passing. James Cavendish watched Serena. She was staring straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't crying. She was breathing deep, steady breaths. That was brutal, James said softly. It was necessary, Serena replied. She looked at her hands. The tremors she used to have, the ones Richard mocked, were gone. You know, James said, you could have destroyed him completely. We could have sued him for the patent theft 10 years ago. We could have pressed criminal charges for the falsified data tonight. He destroyed himself, Serena said. If I spent the next 10 years in court with him, he'd still be in my life. I don't want him in my life, James. I want him in the rearview mirror. James nodded, impressed. So, Sacramento? He'll never go, Serena predicted. He's too proud. He'll try to con someone else. He'll end up selling timeshares or crypto scams. But he won't be doing it with my code. The car merged onto the highway, heading north toward the Golden Gate Bridge. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and silver. Driver, Serena said, pressing the intercom button. Change of destination. Yes, Miss Sterling? Take us to 1400 Sand Hill Road. James looked at her, surprised. The house? I thought the bank seized it this afternoon. They did, Serena said. I called the asset manager while Richard was screaming on the sidewalk. I made a cash offer. You bought the house? James asked. The one he kicked you out of? I bought the land, Serena corrected. The house is an eyesore, minimalist, cold, no soul, just like him. She turned to James, a small smile playing on her lips, the first genuine smile he had seen in weeks. I'm going to bulldoze it, James. Every brick. And then I'm going to build a garden. a massive, chaotic, overgrown garden, with hydrangeas and oaks and messy flower beds. Why a garden? Because, Serena said, leaning back into the leather seat, gardens don't hallucinate. They grow, and they take time, and they're real. James reached over and took her hand. His grip was warm and solid. To the garden, then, he said. To the future, Serena whispered. The car sped up, crossing the bridge, leaving the wreckage of Sterling systems behind in the fog, driving straight toward the only thing that mattered now, a blank slate. 6 months later, Apex Sterling was the most valuable logistics company on the planet. The stock had stabilized at $210 a share. The Onyx system had revolutionized global shipping, reducing carbon emissions by 15% in its first quarter. Serena Sterling was featured on the cover of Forbes. The headline didn't call her a wife, it didn't call her a victim. It read, Serena Sterling, the source code. She was sitting in her office, the corner office that used to be Richard's, though she had gutted it. The Scotch bar was gone, replaced by a whiteboards covered in equations. The dark leather was replaced by light, airy fabrics. Her assistant buzzed in. Miss Sterling, the team is ready for the keynote. Serena stood up. She walked to the window and looked down at the street. Somewhere down there, in the noise of the city, life was moving. She thought about Richard, briefly. Last she heard, he was trying to sell NFTs in Nevada. She didn't feel anger anymore. She just felt indifference. He was a glitch she had patched out. She smoothed her blazer, grabbed her tablet, and walked out the door. She didn't need to be the wife of a genius. She didn't need to be the woman behind the man. She was the system. And the system was finally online. Wow. Talk about a system reboot. Serena didn't just get revenge. She completely rewrote the operating system of her life. It's a powerful reminder that when someone tells you you're nothing without them, they're usually terrified of what you'll become without them. Richard thought he was the architect, but he was just the flashy user interface. Serena was the code, and the code always wins in the end. If you enjoyed this story of justice, redemption, and high-tech corporate warfare, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to see more stories where the underdog takes it all back, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. I've got a new story coming next week about a janitor who secretly ran a hedge fund. You won't want to miss it. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Richard deserved the bus ticket? Or should Serena have left him with absolutely nothing? I'll be reading your replies. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.